As now, well, everybody knows that Condoleezza Rice was President Bush's Secretary of State, but I'm very pleased to announce she has a new job. As of today, she is joining CBS News as a contributor. We're honored to have you making your first appearance on CBS here on Face the Nation. Also with us, and Dr. Rice, let me just start. You were there for both of George Bush's inaugurations. What's the difference in the first one and the second one?
Well, frankly, the first one's a lot more exciting than the second one. I remember being completely taken with the moment. By the second one, I thought, you know, I really need to get to work. And so there's a little bit of a sense, it's not really let down, but you are in the middle of your agenda now. And in foreign policy, very often, the actions you've taken, the consequences are now clear, whether good or bad, and you either have to make a corrective course for some of the bad consequences or try to solidify some of the gains that you've made. And because you really don't have 4 years now, it will start to slip away very quickly. You've got to set some priorities because the President's time, the Secretary of State's time, Secretary of State Defense's time is pretty limited. You'd better know what you want to achieve in this 3 years or so.
You told me earlier this morning something I had never known. You were the National Security Advisor, one of the President's closest aides during the first term. Then you were nominated to be Secretary of State, and you told me you had to go through a full background check.
That's right. I remember thinking, because they were actually going out and talking to my neighbors again, and I remember thinking, didn't we just do this 4 years ago? You know what I've been doing for the last 4 years. So maybe it's a little bit of a sense of the turf wars in Washington between the White House and the State Department, but it was done all over again.
That's just amazing to me. What's your take on that,
Well,
Dr.
I think
Rice?
there's also a non-Washington piece to this. Obviously, relations with Congress are on one side of the aisle pretty poisoned right now. But also out in the country, the American people don't want to see this divisiveness. They want to see the President say, I won the election, and now here's where we're going, but we're going together. I recognize that we have differences that may be even deep. But first and foremost, we're Americans. If you take something like immigration, for instance, I think this is something that could actually unite us again as a country, because Americans know that that's who we are as a people. We're a country of immigrants. We've really benefited tremendously from being able to tap human potential from all over the world. But you can't do it from the point of view of, I'm going to put this down and then you take it or leave it, because there are some deep divisive issues within the immigration debate that are going to have to be smoothed over. So the American people, I live out in California, I don't live here in Washington, and I will tell you that out in the country there's a sense that Washington is divided, and that's not a good thing for America.
Let me ask Dr. Rice, what do you think the big challenges are going to be on foreign policy?
Well, interestingly, I think the first big challenge is to do something about the American economy, because I do think that our international leadership has suffered both from the perception that America can't get its act together on entitlement and the deficit and so forth, and from the reality that without a stronger economy, there are just some things that we cannot do. I was thinking about, we're coming up pretty soon on the anniversary of PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, something that on a bipartisan basis made America overwhelmingly popular because we were dealing with the pandemic of AIDS. I don't know that under today's budget conditions you could suggest that you spend initially $15 billion and then $50 billion on something like that. But that's the soul of our country in foreign policy. So I would say first, get the economy humming again, deal with the budget. And then I'm afraid that, like every president for a number of years, the Middle East has come back to haunt us. And it's going to haunt us for a long time. I don't care how energy independent we become because of the North American energy platform, which we ought to develop. The Middle East is still the most malignant part of the world, and that malignancy is spreading into other parts of the world, including into North Africa, as we've seen.
With us now is former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, who has just been named a CBS News contributor. Secretary Rice, good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
And perfect timing, since you served 2 terms with President George W. Bush, and foreign policy may become another big factor, certainly for President Obama in his second term. What do you think about on a day like today, an inauguration, since you've been part of them?
Well, the first thing that strikes me on a day like today is what a wonderful celebration this is of our democracy, the peaceful transfer of power. Of course, President Obama is being affirmed again, but we look at our institutions. You see the Supreme Court Justice swear in the president. It's a wonderful thing, and it's something that when you've traveled around the world, not every country can take this moment for granted, when the will of the people is confirmed and affirmed the way we're going to see today.
The president's speaking to the world. He's speaking to the United States. He's speaking to the people here in Washington. He's also speaking to Republicans. What does he need to say to Republicans?
Well, on inaugural day, it is really the high point for any presidency, I think, because after that we start to get back to our regular criticism, and we did this wrong and that wrong. And so I would hope the president would use the opportunity to say, I've won the election, but this is now for all Americans to move forward together. Not everyone agreed with the president's agenda in the election, but he won it fair and square. And now it's a question of reuniting the country around some big issues, perhaps around immigration, around getting our fiscal house in order. But it requires now a kind of humility and a reaching across the aisle. And reaching across the aisle, by the way, means reaching out to Americans who also may not have voted for him, but now today affirm him as their president too.
What's his biggest challenge in foreign policy? Because as you well know, often foreign policy ends up as dominating a second term.
Well, there's no doubt that the Middle East is going to be, I think, the biggest challenge. It's possible that you could have something happen in North Korea, for instance, something to keep an eye on, so that Asia looks less stable. But when you look at the events that you've just talked about, you see that the Middle East, the malignancy of Al-Qaeda is spreading into other parts of the world, doing it with a vehemence that perhaps a few years ago we might have hoped we were not going to see again. And so the Middle East trying to hopefully find a way to make the Arab Spring, about which we were all so hopeful just a little while ago, start to bear fruits for democracy and tolerance, trying to do something about Al-Qaeda and its spread into North Africa, and perhaps even returning to the issue of the Palestinian problem and something with the Israelis and Palestinians.
And always Iran.
And always Iran, as a shadow over the chaos in the Middle East, Iran's revolutionary zeal and its tendency to make trouble.
We should note, of course, we're hearing this music in the background because the celebration has begun already out here on the mall with many people here for the president's inauguration. I remember covering President Bush, who you worked for, and his second inaugural was pushing a reset button in some ways around the world. Do you think there's something that President Obama needs to do in this second inaugural address?
Well, every second inaugural is to deal with the consequences of what you did in the first. Mm-hmm. And certainly, I think in the Middle East, the sense that perhaps the United States is not as active, is not as central in the unfolding events in the Middle East, there needs to be a strong statement about that. Some concerns among our allies that the pivot toward Asia means a pivot away from Europe and the Middle East. That needs to be addressed. And finally, to the American people, that we have to stay engaged. We don't have an option to leave the stage. Yes, perhaps we're a bit weary. Yes, we have our own problems. But American leadership is needed in this world. It's desired in this world. And without it, neither our interests nor our values will be well served.
And it is always true that as we sit here today, something will challenge the president that neither us or him could have imagined at this day. I want to finally, he's going to take the oath of office on a Bible from Abraham Lincoln and also Dr. King. This is Dr. King's birthday too. When you think of Dr. King and the new memorial for him, what do you think?
I think of how far this country has come, but I think of the need to continue the reconciliation of the birth defect that was America's slavery. We still have a long way to go. We're not yet race blind. People still suffer in poverty, and poverty and race and a poor education is still a very bad combination. We have a lot of work to be done, but my goodness, how far this country has come.
Secretary Rice, thank you, and we're so glad you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you.